This presentation contains depictions of violence and historical events that may be disturbing to some viewers. Discretion is advised. They were sentenced to death before they could even speak their own names. 2 infants cast into the churning, muddy waters of a flooded river, their only coffin a wicker basket. This wasn't just murder. It was an act of political extermination, designed to wipe a royal bloodline from the face of the earth. But the man who gave the order made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the river would be their grave. Instead, it became their cradle. And in one of history's greatest ironies, this single act of desperate cruelty didn't erase a legacy. It created the most powerful empire the world has ever known. The story you think you know of 2 boys raised by a wolf is just the surface. It's the sanitized storybook version of a saga drenched in betrayal, conspiracy, and a secret so dark it was buried under the very foundations of Rome itself. The question isn't just how these twin boys survived. The real question is why. Was it the random whim of a raging river? Was it the intervention of a powerful, vengeful god? Or was it something else entirely? A hidden hand moving pieces on a board, orchestrating a quiet rebellion that would one day command the world. To find the answer, we have to go back before the basket, before the wolf, to a kingdom built on a lie. Our story begins not in Rome, but in a city that history has nearly forgotten, Alba Longa, a prosperous kingdom nestled in the hills of central Italy, ruled by a wise and just king named Numitor. He was a direct descendant of the great hero Aeneas, a survivor of the Trojan War who, according to legend, had led his people to a new home in Italy. Numitor's claim to the throne was absolute, his reign peaceful, his people loyal. But peace is a fragile thing, and in the shadow of every good king, a darker ambition often waits. Numitor had a younger brother, Amulius. Where Numitor was fair, Amulius was cunning. Where Numitor saw a kingdom to nurture, Amulius saw a prize to be taken. He watched his older brother sit on the throne that he believed should be his, and every day of Numitor's peaceful reign was another day that the poison of jealousy seeped deeper into his soul. He saw his brother's popularity not as a strength for the kingdom, but as a personal insult. He saw the line of succession, passing through Numitor's children, as a wall between him and his destiny. And so, Amulius began to plot. He didn't just want the crown. He wanted to obliterate any possibility of it ever being taken back. He gathered allies in the dark, whispering promises of power and wealth into the ears of ambitious nobles. He sowed seeds of doubt about Numitor's leadership, exploiting minor grievances and turning them into major crises. And when the time was right, he struck. The coup was swift and brutal. Amulius seized the throne, deposing his own brother. But he knew that simply wearing the crown wasn't enough. A deposed king is a symbol, a rallying point for rebellion. So, Amulius had Numitor thrown into a dungeon, hidden away from the public eye, his name all but forbidden. Next, he turned his attention to Numitor's son, the rightful heir. An heir represents the future, a promise of restoration. Amulius couldn't allow that. The prince was hunted down and killed, his blood spilled to secure a throne that was never his. Amulius had seized the present and murdered the future. But there was one loose end, one final threat to his stolen legacy. Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia. He couldn't simply kill her. She was a princess, beloved by many, and her public execution could spark the very uprising he sought to prevent. Amulius needed a more elegant, more sinister solution, a way to neutralize her without making her a martyr. His plan was a stroke of cruel genius. He would use the state religion, the very heart of their culture, as his weapon. He forced Rhea Silvia to become a Vestal virgin. To the public, this was an act of piety, honoring the princess by dedicating her to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and home. But in reality, it was a life sentence. The Vestals were the sacred priestesses of Rome, charged with keeping a holy flame burning, a flame that symbolized the eternal life of the city. But this honor came at a terrible price, a mandatory vow of celibacy for 30 years. They were to remain pure, untouched, devoted only to the goddess. It was a prison disguised as a temple. Amulius had found a way to end Numitor's bloodline forever. Rhea Silvia could have no children, no heirs to one day challenge his rule. And the penalty for a Vestal who broke her vow was one of the most horrific punishments imaginable: being buried alive, sealed in an underground chamber with a meager portion of bread and water, left to slowly suffocate in the darkness. Amulius had locked her away, ensuring his reign was secure. Or so he thought. It is in this sacred prison that our story takes a turn, from a political thriller into the realm of myth and legend. One day, as Rhea Silvia went to a sacred grove to draw water for a ritual, she was overcome by a deep sleep, and in her slumber she was visited. The accounts say it was Mars, the god of war, a powerful, terrifying deity drawn to her beauty. He descended from the heavens, and there in the quiet grove, he lay with the consecrated virgin. When she awoke, she was with child. Now we are faced with a profound mystery. Did a god truly intervene? Was this a divine act, a sign that the heavens themselves had chosen to defy the tyrant Amulius? Or is this part of the story something else? A desperate cover for a far more human and far more dangerous truth. Was it possible that Rhea Silvia, trapped and alone, had a secret lover? A man brave or foolish enough to risk not only his own life, but hers for a forbidden affair? Perhaps a supporter of her father, trying to create a new heir in secret? Or was the story of Mars a brilliant invention on her part? A desperate gamble to protect herself and her unborn children? After all, who would dare harm the offspring of a god? A child of a mortal lover was proof of a crime punishable by a horrifying death. But a child of Mars? That was a miracle. A weapon. We will never know for certain what happened in that grove, but the consequences of that day would echo for eternity. Because Rhea Silvia did not give birth to one child. She gave birth to twins. Two healthy, robust boys. When news reached Amulius, his court was thrown into a panic. His perfectly laid plan was in ruins. The bloodline he had tried so hard to extinguish had miraculously reappeared. And worse, it now came with a potential claim of divine parentage. He was trapped. If he killed the children of Mars, he risked the wrath of the gods and the fury of the people. But if he let them live, he was nurturing the very swords that would one day be pointed at his throat. His fury was matched only by his fear. He summoned Rhea Silvia, who stood before him defiant, and declared that the mighty god of war was the father of her sons. Amulius scoffed at the claim, but he couldn't ignore the possibility, however remote. He couldn't risk a public execution. So once again he devised a plan to let nature do his dirty work. He wouldn't be a murderer. He would simply be an observer of fate. He ordered a servant to take the twin infants, Romulus and Remus, and cast them into the Tiber River. He commanded them to be drowned, to be washed away and forgotten. Their deaths an unfortunate accident. It was the perfect crime, a death sentence delivered by the hand of a god, the river god Tibernus. The servant, his heart heavy with the terrible task, took the two babies. He placed them in a simple basket and carried them to the riverbank. But when he arrived, he saw that the Tiber was not calm. A great storm had swelled the river, causing it to burst its banks and flood the surrounding fields. He couldn't reach the main current. To obey the king's order, he would have to wade into the raging floodwaters himself, a near certain death. So, in a moment of pity or perhaps fear, he did the only thing he could. He placed the basket gently into the calmest edge of the floodwater, in a shallow pool at the base of a fig tree. He said a prayer, turned his back and walked away, leaving the fate of the two boys to the gods. The basket, holding the future of the world, began to float. It didn't sink. It didn't capsize. It simply drifted, carried by a gentle current, away from the tyrant's reach, and towards a destiny no one could have ever imagined. The Tiber River, swollen with winter rain, was a churning, angry god. It had claimed men and livestock, ripped trees from their roots, and redrawn the very map of the valley. Yet this tiny wicker basket, this fragile ark holding two condemned lives, was treated with a strange reverence. The current, which should have smashed it against the rocks or pulled it under into the silt-choked depths, instead seemed to guide it. It was as if the river itself, the ancient spirit of the land, recognized the importance of its cargo. The water steered the basket away from treacherous eddies and sharp branches, nudging it gently along a path of its own choosing. Inside, the twin boys, cold and hungry, did not cry. Perhaps they were too weak, or perhaps even then some nascent divine instinct told them that silence was their shield. They were adrift in a world of chaos, abandoned by men, but protected by an unseen force. Hours turned into a day. The sun beat down, and then the cold of night crept in. The basket continued its impossible journey until, finally, the floodwaters began to recede. The river's rage subsided, leaving behind a landscape of mud and debris. As the water level dropped, the basket's journey came to an end. It didn't wash up on a barren, muddy bank. Instead, it was gently caught, snagged by the exposed roots of a wild fig tree that clung to the base of a hill. This was the Palatine Hill, a place that would one day become the heart of the world, and this tree, the Ficus ruminalis, would be remembered as sacred. There, at the foot of their future, the infants lay, their fate hanging in the balance. They were alive, but for how long? Starvation, or the wild animals drawn to the riverbank, would surely claim them soon. The servant had done his duty. The king believed them dead. Their story was supposed to be over, but the gods were not finished, and their chosen agent of salvation was not a hero, or a nymph, or a benevolent spirit. It was a beast. From the shadows of the dense woods that covered the hill, she emerged. A she-wolf. She was huge, lean, and powerful, her coat the color of twilight. Her yellow eyes burned with a primal intelligence. She had recently given birth, her own pups lost to some forest tragedy, and her udders were full and aching. She was drawn by the scent of life, by the faint mewling sounds the boys were now making. Any other predator would have seen an easy meal, but this wolf was different. The Romans would later say she was an avatar of the god Mars himself, a living symbol of the fierce, unyielding spirit he had passed on to his sons. She approached the basket cautiously, sniffing the air. The infants, seeing the massive, furry head loom over them, did not scream in terror. They were too young to know fear, to understand the difference between a mother and a monster. They only knew hunger. One of them, perhaps Romulus, reached out a tiny hand. The wolf lowered her head. She did not snarl. She did not attack. She nudged the basket with her wet nose, tipping it just enough for the boys to tumble out onto the soft mud. And then the miracle happened. She lay down beside them, exposing her belly. The twin boys, guided by an instinct as old as life itself, crawled to her and began to nurse. This was a scene that defied all logic, a moment suspended between the natural and the divine. A predator, the very symbol of the savage wild, nurturing the abandoned sons of a king. She fed them her milk, giving them the strength of the wild, the resilience of the hunter. She licked them clean with her rough tongue, warming them with her body. She was their protector. When other animals, jackals or birds of prey, drew near, a low growl from her throat was enough to send them scattering. For days, this unholy family existed in a world of its own at the foot of the Palatine Hill. The she-wolf, the Lupa, became their mother. She gave them life when humanity had sentenced them to death. And in her milk they drank in not just sustenance, but something more. A ferocity, a wildness that would define them for the rest of their lives. This bizarre spectacle was not to remain a secret. A shepherd, in the service of King Amulius, was tending his flock nearby. His name was Faustulus. He was a simple man, weathered and kind, a man who understood the rhythms of the land and the behavior of its creatures. He'd noticed the she-wolf acting strangely, returning to the same spot by the river day after day, not hunting but guarding. His curiosity piqued, and fearing she might be a danger to his sheep, he decided to investigate. He moved slowly, cautiously through the trees, his wooden staff held ready. As he peered through the last of the foliage, he stopped dead. His heart hammered in his chest. The sight before him was so unbelievable, he thought the sun had addled his brain. There was the she-wolf lying peacefully on the ground, and nestled against her, suckling as if she were their own mother, were two healthy human baby boys. Faustulus was terrified, but he was also filled with a profound sense of awe. This was no ordinary event. This was a sign, an omen. He knew the stories, the whispers of the gods who walked the earth and intervened in the lives of mortals. He watched, hidden for a long time, as the wolf cared for the children with a tenderness that seemed impossible. He saw her ferocity when she chased away a vulture that circled too close. He realized he was witnessing a divine act. These were no ordinary children. Waiting until the wolf left to find water, Faustulus knew he had to act. His heart pounded as he scurried from his hiding place. The babies, full and sleepy, looked up at him with wide, clear eyes. They were beautiful, strong, and impossibly alive. He saw the fine linen they were wrapped in, a sign of noble birth. He saw the basket, clearly made by human hands. He pieced together the story in his mind. These were abandoned children, left to die but saved by the gods. He couldn't leave them. To do so would be to defy the will of whatever power had orchestrated this miracle. Gently he scooped them up, one in each arm. They were heavier than he expected, solid and warm. He carried them away from the river, away from their wolf mother, and took them back towards the world of men. He brought the infants home to his small, humble hut. His wife, Laurentia, met him at the door, her face a mixture of confusion and worry. When she saw the babies in his arms, she gasped. Faustulus quickly told her the entire incredible story: the basket, the fig tree, the she-wolf. Some later gossips and cynics would whisper that Laurentia had been a prostitute, and that the Romans, ashamed of this, called prostitutes lupi, she-wolves, and so invented the story of the animal to cover up a more sordid truth. But that is the story of small, cynical men. The story that endured, the one that fired the imagination of an empire, was the story of the miracle. Laurentia, whatever her past, had a good heart. She had recently lost her own child, and seeing these two boys, she felt not suspicion, but a surge of maternal love. It was another sign. They were meant to be hers. Together, she and Faustulus decided to raise the children as their own. They named them Romulus and Remus. They fed them, clothed them, and loved them, but they could never fully tame them. The boys grew up among the other shepherds, but they were not like them. They were different. The milk of the wolf ran in their veins. They were faster, stronger, and bolder than any other child. They didn't just play games, they hunted. They didn't just lead the other boys, they commanded them. They had an air of wild nobility, an untamed charisma that drew others to them. They were the undisputed kings of the shepherds, quick to fight, fiercely loyal to each other, and utterly fearless. They grew tall and powerful, their bodies hardened by the rugged hills, their minds sharpened by the constant need for survival. They were becoming young men, and in their eyes, you could still see the flicker of the wild yellow eyes of the wolf who had saved them. They were a force of nature, a storm gathering on the quiet hillsides, and the world of men had no idea what was about to hit it. They grew into their power not like kings in a palace, but like alpha wolves in a pack. The other shepherds, rough and hardened men who had spent their lives under the unforgiving sun, saw it immediately. These weren't just Faustulus's boys. They were different. There was a stillness in Romulus, a coiled intensity, the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In Remus, there was a restless energy, a quick, flashing grin that could turn to a snarl in a heartbeat. He was the thunder to Romulus's lightning. Together, they were unmatched. They could track a lost sheep through impossible terrain, read the wind and the sky like an open book, and fight with a ferocity that bordered on the supernatural. They didn't lead through commands, they led through action. When wild dogs threatened the flocks, it was Romulus and Remus who met them head-on, not with fear, but with a chilling familiarity, moving with the same savage grace as the beasts they fought. When bandits swept down from the mountains to steal livestock, it was the twins who organized the shepherds, turning a scattered group of farmers into a disciplined hunting party. They would divide their followers, Romulus leading one group, Remus the other. They used the terrain as a weapon, setting ambushes in narrow ravines, using wolf calls as signals to coordinate their attacks in the dead of night. They were more than just protectors, they were a symbol of defiance. In a world ruled by distant, wealthy landowners and their hired overseers, the twins represented a wild, untamable freedom. They took back what was stolen, and they didn't just return it. They distributed the spoils, the recovered livestock, the bandits' gold, among the poorest of the shepherds, cementing a loyalty that no amount of money could ever buy. Their legend began to grow, whispered in taverns and around campfires. They were the sons of Mars, some said. Others claimed they were demigods, blessed by the spirits of the forest. No one knew the truth, but everyone knew the results. The hills around their home became a sanctuary, a place where the weak were protected and the predators, both animal and human, learned to tread lightly. But this growing power did not go unnoticed. The lands they roamed were vast, a patchwork of territories belonging to different masters. The most powerful landowner in the region was a man named Numitor, a wealthy, aging nobleman from the city of Albalonga. His shepherds were numerous, arrogant, and accustomed to taking what they wanted. They saw the pastures where the twins grazed their flocks not as shared land, but as their own private property. And they saw the twins' growing influence as a direct threat. Clashes became inevitable. At first, they were small things, disputes over watering holes, arguments over grazing boundaries. Numitor's men would drive their flocks into the twins' territory, a deliberate act of provocation. But they underestimated who they were dealing with. Romulus and Remus didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They responded. One evening, a group of Numitor's shepherds, emboldened by numbers, surrounded one of Faustulus's younger herdsmen and began to beat him, planning to steal his flock. Before they could land more than a few blows, two shadows detached themselves from the twilight. It was Romulus and Remus. There was no warning, no battle cry, just a sudden brutal explosion of violence. The brothers moved as one, a whirlwind of fists and fury. Numitor's men were scattered in moments, left bruised and broken in the dust, their own flock now driven off by the twins as payment for the insult. The message was clear. This land had new alphas. This victory, however, was a double-edged sword. It elevated the twins to heroes among their own people, but it painted a target on their backs. The overseers of Numitor's estate were humiliated. Their authority had been challenged and broken by two upstart farmhands. They couldn't let it stand. They began to plot, not for another open confrontation, but for revenge. They knew they couldn't beat the twins in a fair fight, so they decided not to have one. Their chance came during the festival of Lupa. It was an ancient, wild celebration, a day of chaotic revelry and release. The young men of the region would strip down, cover themselves in the skins of sacrificed goats, and run a course around the Palatine Hill, playfully whipping onlookers with leather thongs in a ritual of purification and fertility. It was a time of sanctioned madness, when identities were blurred and the normal rules of society were suspended. It was the perfect cover for an ambush. Numitor's men laid their trap with cunning. They knew the twins, as leaders of the local youth, would be at the very heart of the celebration. They also knew the brothers' one weakness, their fierce loyalty to each other. Separate them and they could be conquered. As the festival reached its peak, the air thick with wine, laughter, and chanting, the trap was sprung. A manufactured fight broke out on one side of the festival, drawing the ever-vigilant Romulus and a number of his followers into the fray. It was a well-executed diversion. At that exact moment, on the other side of the hill, a much larger force of Numitor's men burst from the woods, armed not with festive whips, but with heavy clubs and nets. They swarmed Remus. He fought like a cornered wolf, his laughter from moments before replaced by a furious roar. He was a blur of motion, taking down 2, then 3 of his attackers, but he was alone. The sheer weight of numbers was too much. A net flew through the air, entangling him. He thrashed, tearing at the ropes, but they held him fast. A heavy club came down, striking him on the head. The world exploded in a flash of white, and then went dark. Across the hill, Romulus felt it. A sudden, gut-wrenching dread. A severing of a bond that had been unbroken since the womb. He dispatched the brawlers with brutal efficiency and turned, his eyes scanning the chaotic crowd. He saw it then. A group of men dragging a body away, disappearing back into the forest. He saw a flash of his brother's tunic. He let out a cry of pure rage, a sound that was more animal than human, and started to run. But he was too late. The crowd, the chaos of the festival, it was all in his way. By the time he broke free, they were gone. Remus had been captured. He was bound in chains and dragged away, not as a common shepherd, but as a captured bandit, a trophy to be presented to their master. He was taken to Albalonga, to the estate of the man whose shepherds he had fought, whose authority he had defied. He was brought before the very man whose throne his own great-uncle had stolen, the man whose daughter was his mother. He was brought, a prisoner in chains, before his own grandfather Numitor. And neither of them had any idea. The air in Numitor's hall was thick with the dust of ages and the bitter scent of resentment. For decades, this was his world. A gilded cage where he was allowed to live but not to rule. He was a king in name only, a living relic of a forgotten time. And now, standing before him, was a common brigand, a leader of shepherds, caught red-handed stealing from his lands. The boy was tall, powerfully built, with an air of defiance that bordered on arrogance. He didn't look like a thief. He looked different. There was a fire in his eyes, an untamed nobility that seemed utterly out of place. Numitor, his voice dry as old parchment, began his interrogation. He asked the boy his name. Remus. He asked where he came from. Remus, chin held high, spoke of the wilderness, of a shepherd's hut, of a life spent under the open sky. He spoke of his twin brother, Romulus, and their band of followers. There was no fear in his voice, only a simmering anger at his capture. He wasn't begging for mercy. He was practically demanding justice for what he saw as an unfair arrest. As Remus spoke, a strange feeling began to stir in Numitor's chest. A flicker of something long dormant. The boy's age. He looked to be about 18. The story of being raised by a simple shepherd, it was common enough. Yet, there was something more. Numitor pressed him, asking about his birth, his parents. Remus scoffed. He had no parents to speak of. He and his brother were found as infants, he said, by a shepherd named Faustulus. Found abandoned, left to the mercy of the wild. The words hung in the air, heavy as tombstones. Found, as infants, twins, 18 years ago. The gears of memory, rusted from decades of disuse, began to grind slowly in Numitor's mind. He remembered a day of unimaginable grief. He remembered his daughter, Rhea Silvia, her face a mask of sorrow. He remembered his brother, Amulius, his face a mask of false sympathy, telling him the twins had been born, and that, by his decree, they had been condemned to the Tiber River for being the forbidden offspring of a Vestal virgin. A threat to his illegitimate rule eliminated. Could it be? After all this time, was it possible the gods had intervened? That the river had spared them? Numitor looked at the young man before him, really looked at him. He saw the proud set of his jaw, the regal bearing he held even in chains. It was the face of his family. It was the face of a king. The resemblance to his daughter Rhea was faint, but it was there, a ghost in the architecture of his face. The old man's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against his ribs. He was looking at his own flesh and blood. He was looking at his grandson. And this boy, this prince of Albalonga, had no idea who he was or who he was speaking to. The irony was a dagger in his heart. His salvation had been delivered to him in chains. Meanwhile, back in the hills, chaos erupted. Word of Remus's capture spread like wildfire through the community of shepherds. But no one was more panicked than Faustulus. The old shepherd felt the cold hand of dread clutch his heart. For 18 years he had guarded his secret. For 18 years, he had raised the boys as his own, loving them, teaching them, and fearing the day their past would finally catch up to them. That day had arrived. He knew where they had taken Remus. Not to Amulius, the king, but to his brother Numitor, on whose land the supposed crime had been committed. The name struck Faustulus like a lightning bolt. Numitor, the rightful king, the boy's own grandfather. The shepherd knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no coincidence. This was the hand of fate or the gods finally making its move. And he was standing right in the middle of it. He had a choice to make, and he had to make it now. He could stay silent, let events unfold, and pray for Remus's life. But he knew what happened to thieves and rabble-rousers. Amulius's justice was swift and merciless. Or he could reveal the truth. He could tell the world who the boys really were. But that truth was treason. It was a direct challenge to King Amulius. To speak it aloud was to sign his own death warrant. Yet, to stay silent was to condemn the very boys he had saved from the river all those years ago. He looked at the small wooden trough he had kept hidden for 18 years. The very vessel he had found them in, a crude ark that had carried the future of Albalonga to his doorstep. It was his only proof. It was everything. His choice was made. He had to tell Romulus. He found him where he knew he would be. Rallying the shepherds, his eyes blazing with fury, preparing to storm Numitor's estate and free his brother by force. Romulus was a whirlwind of action, his voice ringing out with commands. He was planning a rescue, a small violent skirmish to get his brother back. He had no idea he was about to start a civil war. Faustulus grabbed him, pulling him away from the growing crowd. "Stop," he pleaded, his voice cracking with urgency. "You can't just attack. You don't understand what's happening." Romulus turned on him, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "Don't understand? They have my brother. I'm going to get him back." "Listen to me," Faustulus said, his hands gripping Romulus's arms. "There is more at play here than stolen cattle. Your whole life. The story I told you, it was not the entire truth. And there, under the darkening sky, with the shouts of angry shepherds as their backdrop, Faustulus finally unburdened his soul. He told Romulus everything. He told him he was not his son. He told him of the day he found two infants crying by the riverbank, sheltered by a she-wolf. He told him of the royal clothes they were wrapped in, and of the trough that carried them. And then he delivered the final world-shattering blow. He told him their names. Not the names he had given them, but the names of their parents. Their mother, he explained, was Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and their grandfather was Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, the very man who now held Remus prisoner. The man who had ordered them thrown into the river, he explained, was the current king, Amulius, Numitor's brother, their own great-uncle, the man who stole the throne. Imagine that moment. Imagine being Romulus. Your entire world, the very foundation of your identity, ripped out from under you in a single breathless confession. You are not a shepherd. You are a prince. Your brother is not just a captive. He is a political prisoner in the hands of your own family. Your entire life has not been one of humble obscurity, but of hidden exile. The constant feeling that you were meant for more, the natural leadership you possessed, the royal bearing you both carried, it all suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't arrogance. It was blood right. The plan to rescue his brother from a petty nobleman was instantly incinerated, replaced by a purpose 1,000 times greater. This was no longer about a stolen flock. This was about a stolen kingdom. This was about destiny. The anger he felt for his brother's capture was now magnified into a righteous fury for his family's betrayal, for his mother's suffering, for his grandfather's stolen crown. As this revelation was crashing down upon Romulus, a similar understanding was dawning in Numitor's hall. The old man, now almost certain, had sent messengers to his daughter Rhea Silvia's prison. He described the captive. He repeated the story the boy had told him. Confirmation came back. Her heart too dared to hope. It all matched. The timing, the story, the resemblance. Numitor looked at Remus, no longer a prisoner but a sign. Promise. The gods had not forgotten him. Two plots began to form, entirely independent of each other, yet aimed at the very same target. In his hall, Numitor began to think. How could he use this? How could this boy, this grandson, be the key to undoing the crime that had defined his entire life? And in the hills, Romulus, his mind reeling but his purpose clear as glass, gathered his shepherds. His speech to them was no longer just a call to rescue a friend. It was a call to revolution. He told them the truth. He told them who he was. And he promised them that the tyranny of Amulius was about to end. He would not just rescue his brother. He would liberate Alba Longa. He would take back his family's throne. The plan was no longer to launch a small raid on Numitor's estate. The plan was to march on the city itself, to bring the full force of their wild, untamed brotherhood crashing down on the palace gates. The storm was coming to Alba Longa, and King Amulius, sitting on his stolen throne, had no idea that his own blood, the nephews he thought were fish food, were coming to collect their birthright with fire and steel. The first sound was the splintering of wood, a cannon shot of cracking timber that echoed through the manicured courtyards of Alba Longa. It was a sound of violation. The palace guards, fat and complacent from years of peace under a tyrant's thumb, barely had time to grab their spears before the gates buckled inwards, torn from their hinges by the raw strength of 100 angry men. Through the breach poured not an army but a flood. Shepherds, farmers, men with calloused hands and sun-scorched necks, armed with hunting spears, wood axes, and a fury that had been simmering for a generation. At their head was a figure who seemed more myth than man, Romulus, his eyes burning with a cold fire, a wolf pelt slung over his shoulders, moving with a predator's grace. This wasn't just a mob. This was a plan. As Romulus and his men crashed into the outer defenses, creating a chaotic focal point of violence and confusion, a second front opened up from within. Remus, freed from his cell by loyalists to Numitor, was a whirlwind of vengeance inside the city walls. He hadn't waited for his brother's arrival. The moment his chains were off, he became the spark. He and a small band of conspirators, men who remembered the just rule of the true king, began their own silent, deadly work. They moved through the barracks, slitting the throats of sleeping guards. They opened the armories, distributing swords and shields to anyone who would take up the cause. So when the main gate shattered, The palace guard found themselves trapped. An enemy at the gates and an enemy in their halls. A pincer movement of pure, unadulterated rage. Inside the throne room, King Amulius was enjoying his wine. The distant shouts were an annoyance, nothing more. A servant, pale and trembling, scurried in to report the disturbance. Amulius waved a dismissive hand. "Shepherds," he scoffed. "A dispute over grazing rights, no doubt. Send a cohort. Make an example of their leader. Hang him from the gate he so rudely damaged." The king was a man insulated by layers of stolen power. He saw the world not as it was but as he wished it to be. In his mind, the common folk were cattle. They might get spooked, they might even stampede, but they were never a threat to the farmer. He had forgotten the fundamental truth of power. It is a story people agreed to believe in. And tonight the story was changing. The captain of his personal guard, a grizzled veteran, burst in, his armor dented, a streak of blood on his cheek. "My lord, this is no riot. It's an insurrection. They fight with a purpose. They're organized. They're shouting a name. Numitor." The name hit Amulius like a physical blow. Numitor. His brother. The ghost he thought he'd exorcised 2 decades ago. He stood up, the wine goblet slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor. A splash of crimson like a prophecy. He could hear the fighting now, not distant but close. The screams were in the palace itself. The city's arteries were choking on violence. Romulus's force was a battering ram, smashing through the thinning lines of guards, their wild rustic fighting style a thing of brutal efficiency against the formulaic training of the city soldiers. They didn't form lines, they swarmed, a pack of wolves overwhelming a stag. Meanwhile, Remus was a scalpel. He knew the palace's secret passages from the stories his grandfather had told him. He led his men through servants' corridors and forgotten tunnels, bypassing the main fighting and emerging deep within the royal sanctum. His target wasn't the army. It was the king. The 2 fronts, the hammer and the anvil, were closing in on the throne room. The sounds of battle grew into a deafening roar that filled the opulent hall. Amulius, for the first time in 20 years, felt the cold touch of fear. His guards, the elite of the elite, were being cut down just outside his doors. He drew his own sword, a gilded ceremonial thing that hadn't seen true combat in his lifetime. He was a politician, a schemer, not a warrior. He had won his throne with whispers and poison, not with steel. The great doors to the throne room groaned, then splintered under the force of a heavy bench used as a ram. They burst open, and standing in the frame, silhouetted by the torchlight of the burning palace, were 2 young men. They were nearly identical, tall and broad-shouldered, breathing heavily, their faces smeared with soot and blood. They looked less like men and more like demigods, avatars of vengeance sent from some forgotten savage world. Amulius stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Who are you?" he stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. Romulus stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the tyrant. He didn't answer immediately. He let the old man stew in his terror, let him see the end of his world in the faces of 2 strangers. It was Remus who spoke, his voice dripping with the venom that had been brewing his entire life. "You threw 2 infants into a river 20 years ago," he said, his words cutting through the din of battle. "You murdered their mother to secure your pathetic little throne." The blood drained from Amulius's face. His sword hand trembled. He looked from one twin to the other, seeing the ghost of his brother Numitor in their jaws, the specter of his niece Rhea Silvia in their eyes. He saw the impossible truth. The river had not claimed them. The wolves had not eaten them. The god of war had protected them. They were the debt he had never thought he'd have to pay. "It can't be," he whispered, backing away, stumbling against the steps of his throne. The throne he had killed for. The throne that was about to become his tomb. "You sentenced us to death," Romulus said, his voice a low growl, closing the distance between them. "But the gods had other plans. The she-wolf was more merciful than you. The shepherd was a better father than you could ever be a king." Amulius raised his sword, a desperate, clumsy gesture. "Guards! To me!" he shrieked. But no one came. His guards were dead or had fled. He was alone, a king with no kingdom, a man with no allies, facing the living embodiment of his greatest crime. Remus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "There's no one left to save you, uncle." The word uncle was the final nail. Amulius let out a guttural cry of despair and lunged, not with any hope of victory, but with the reflexive panic of a cornered animal. It was over in a second. Romulus parried the clumsy thrust with contemptuous ease, the gilded sword clattering away. Before Amulius could even register his disarmament, Remus's blade was in his gut. The king gasped, a look of shocked surprise on his face, as if he couldn't believe his own mortality. He sank to his knees, clutching the wound, looking up at the two brothers who towered over him. They offered no final words, no grand speech for the history books. There was no honor in this kill. This was an execution, an extermination. Romulus stepped forward and, with a single brutal downward thrust, drove his own sword through the tyrant's heart, pinning him to the marble floor beneath his own throne. Silence. The roar of battle outside seemed to fade into a distant hum. In the flickering torchlight of the great hall, the two brothers stood over the body of their great-uncle, the man who had ordered their death before they could even speak their own names. The wolf's blood that had sung in their veins moments before now grew quiet. They had done it. Vengeance was complete. The throne was theirs. But as they looked at the cooling corpse, at the empty gilded chair, and out through the shattered doors at a city in flames, a new, heavier reality began to dawn. They had torn down the old world. But what, in the name of the gods, were they going to build in its place? The silence that followed the storm of violence was heavier than any scream. In the throne room of Alba Longa, the air, thick with the coppery scent of blood and the dust of fallen plaster, began to settle. For Romulus and Remus, standing amidst the wreckage of a dynasty they had just ended, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a chilling clarity. They were no longer just shepherds. They were no longer just outlaws. They were kingslayers. And with that title came a weight they had never imagined. What do you do when you've killed a king? When you've shattered the symbol of order, however corrupt it may have been? The city outside was a powder keg. Shouts echoed in the streets, some of fear, some of confusion, some of a wild, unbridled joy. The people had been freed from a tyrant, but freedom without leadership is just another word for chaos. The twins' army of shepherds and runaways, men loyal to them and them alone, held the palace, but they couldn't hold a city of thousands. Power, they were learning, wasn't just about the strength to take it. It was about the wisdom to hold it. Word spread like wildfire. The grandsons of Numitor, the true heirs raised by a wolf and blessed by Mars, had returned. They had cut down the usurper Amulius. They had reclaimed their birthright. The people of Alba Longa, desperate for a story they could believe in, for a symbol of hope, poured into the palace square. They weren't a mob anymore. They were a congregation. They chanted the brothers' names. Romulus, Remus. They were saviors. They were heroes. And in that moment, the twins faced their first true test, not of strength but of character. The throne was empty. It was theirs for the taking. They had the loyalty of the armed men. They had the adoration of the public. Either one of them could have stepped forward, placed the crown on his head, and declared himself the new king. The city would have roared its approval, but they didn't. Instead, they sent for their grandfather. Numitor, a man broken by decades of grief and humiliation, was brought from his quiet exile into the heart of the chaos. He was old, his hands trembled, but as he saw his daughter's sons, standing tall and fearsome where his brother had once ruled, something of the old king returned to his eyes. Romulus and Remus, in a gesture that stunned the crowds, knelt before him. They did not claim the throne they had won with their own blood. They gave it back. They restored the rightful king. This act of piety, of loyalty to family and tradition, cemented their legend. They weren't just conquerors, they were restorers of justice. But as the cheers for King Numitor echoed through the 7 hills of Alba Longa, a new and difficult truth began to dawn on the brothers. They had given away the prize. They were now princes in their grandfather's court. Heroes, yes, but still subjects. And that was a role neither of them was born to play. They had tasted absolute freedom in the wild. They had commanded men who would die for them. They had toppled a kingdom. How could they now stand behind a throne, taking orders, living in the shadow of another man, even one they loved and respected? The gilded cages of the palace felt smaller and more confining than any shepherd's hut. The structured life of the city, with its ancient laws and petty squabbles, felt like a leash on their wild spirits. They were wolves in a sheepfold. The restlessness grew in them, a familiar fire in their blood. They were builders, not inheritors. Their destiny wasn't to rule Albalonga. Their destiny was to create something new, something that was entirely their own. The idea took root, a single seed that quickly grew into an unshakable conviction. They would found their own city, a city for men like them, for the shepherds, the runaways, the exiles, the forgotten sons, a place where a man's worth wasn't measured by his bloodline, but by the strength of his sword arm and the fire in his heart. A city built on courage, not on ancient tradition. With Numitor's blessing, they gathered their followers. They left the comforting walls of Albalonga and ventured back into the wilderness that had been their true home. They journeyed down the Tiber River, back towards the place where their story had begun, to the swampy, seven-hilled landscape where Faustulus had found them, suckling at the teat of a she-wolf beneath a sacred fig tree. Here, this was the place. The gods had saved them here. It was here they would build their future. The land was perfect, a river for trade, hills for defense, fertile soil for farming. It was a blank canvas on which they could paint their masterpiece. But as they stood there, looking out at the landscape of their future, the first fatal crack appeared in their brotherhood. For the first time in their lives, Romulus and Remus looked at the same thing and saw two different futures. They both agreed on the general location, but they could not agree on the specific hill upon which to build the city's citadel, its heart and soul. Romulus, ever the strategist, the more pragmatic and disciplined of the two, favored the Palatine Hill. It was a natural fortress, steep cliffs on three sides, a commanding view of the river and the surrounding plains. It was defensible, secure. A city built here would be a city built to last, a bastion of power that could withstand any enemy. His vision was of order, of strength, of a city that would project its power outwards. Remus, on the other hand, was drawn to the Aventine Hill. It was lower, closer to the river, closer to the great salt flats that were the region's most valuable resource. He saw a city of commerce, a hub of trade, a place of opportunity and wealth. The Aventine was more open, more accessible, a welcoming hand to the world, not a clenched fist. His vision was of prosperity, of freedom, of a city that would draw the world to its gates. Their disagreement was more than just a matter of geography. It was a clash of their very souls. Romulus, the planner, saw the world as a place of threats to be managed. Remus, the charmer, saw it as a world of opportunities to be seized. The Palatine was a fortress. The Aventine was a marketplace. Which was more important? Security or prosperity? Order or freedom? It was a question with no easy answer. Their followers began to take sides. The more disciplined, military-minded men sided with Romulus. The merchants, the traders, the men looking to make a quick fortune, they sided with Remus. The argument grew heated. Taunts were exchanged. The easy camaraderie that had bound the brothers together their entire lives began to fray. 4 years they had been two halves of a single unstoppable force. Now, for the first time, they were pulling in opposite directions. The strain was immense. The bond that had survived a king's decree, a river's current, and a life in the wilderness was now threatening to snap over a patch of dirt. They saw the danger. They saw how their rivalry could tear their dream apart before the first stone was ever laid. They were leaders, not just brawlers. They couldn't let their followers come to blows. So they agreed to let a higher power decide. They would put their faith in the ancient practice of augury. They would ask the gods to show them a sign. The plan was simple and steeped in sacred tradition. Each brother would go to his chosen hill. Romulus to the Palatine, Remus to the Aventine. They would each perform the sacred rites and wait, watching the skies for a sign in the flight of birds. Vultures, the sacred birds of the war god Mars, their supposed father, would be the messengers. The one who saw the most vultures would be the one favored by the gods. His hill would be the site of the new city, and he would be its king. It was a divine gamble for the highest possible stakes. The fate of their city, their people, and their own brotherhood now rested on the wings of carrion birds. As the sun began to set, casting long dark shadows across the valleys that separated them, the two brothers parted ways. Remus, confident and smiling, climbed the Aventine. Romulus, grim and determined, ascended the Palatine. They each took their seat on the bare earth alone, turning their faces to the vast empty sky. And they waited. The silence between the two hills was no longer the silence of nature. It was the silence of anticipation, the deep, humming quiet of a world holding its breath, waiting for destiny to finally choose its champion. Hours bled into one another under the unforgiving Italian sun. On the Aventine Hill, Remus scanned the horizon, his eyes raw, his patience worn to a thread. Every shadow, every distant flutter of a leaf, was a false alarm that sent a jolt through his system. He was a hunter, used to the explosive burst of action after a long, quiet stalk. This passive waiting felt like a betrayal of his very nature. He felt the gaze of his followers, their faith in him a heavy cloak on his shoulders. He had to be the one. He had to be first. On the Palatine, Romulus was a statue carved from stone. His stillness was different from his brothers. It was not the tense quiet of a predator, but the deep-rooted patience of a farmer waiting for a seed to sprout. He understood that some things could not be rushed. He wasn't just looking at the sky. He was feeling it, sensing its rhythms, trying to become one with the will of the gods he sought to understand. He knew that this was not a contest of speed, but of significance. The city they would build needed more than a quick victory. It needed an undeniable mandate from heaven itself. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and still nothing. The crowds on the plain below grew restless. Murmurs turned into anxious chatter. Had the gods abandoned them? Was this entire contest a fool's errand? Doubt, like a cold mist, began to seep from the valley floor up the slopes of the 7 hills. And then it happened. A cry tore through the air from the Aventine Hill. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. Remus was pointing, his arm ramrod straight, his body thrumming with victory. His followers erupted. There, against the bruised twilight sky, were birds. Vultures. Circling directly over Remus's head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 black shapes, wheeling in a lazy prophetic spiral. The message was clear. The gods had spoken. Remus was the chosen one. His followers surged forward, their cheers echoing across the valley, a wave of sound crashing against the silent Palatine Hill. Remus drank it in, the adoration, the confirmation. He had won. The city would be his. Remus. He tasted the name on his lips. Felt right. Felt like destiny. On the Palatine, Romulus's followers looked at their leader, their faces a mask of confusion and despair. They had lost. Romulus, however, did not move. He didn't even look towards his brother's celebration. His eyes remained fixed on the sky above his own head, his expression unreadable. Was it denial? Stubborn pride? No, it was focus. As the cheers for Remus reached their crescendo, a new shape appeared in the sky above the Palatine, and then another, and another. A second flock of vultures, larger, more commanding, descended from the heavens. They didn't circle lazily. They moved with a purpose, a dark, swirling vortex of wings. Romulus's followers fell silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Then, with dawning rapturous hope, they began to count, their voices hushed at first, then growing louder with each number. 6, the same as Remus. 7, 8, 9. The cheering on the Aventine faltered, replaced by a confused murmur. People were turning, pointing from one hill to the other. 10, 11, 12. 12 vultures. A full dozen, a number of immense power and significance, now circled directly over the head of Romulus. The silence that followed was more profound than any that had come before. The celebration for Remus was extinguished as if by a sudden storm. Now the true contest began. Not a contest of patience, but of interpretation. The divine sign was not a simple answer. It was a riddle. Remus and his followers stormed down the Aventine, their faces flushed with anger and indignation. They met Romulus's descending party in the valley between the hills, the very land they had sworn to build their future upon. I saw them first. Remus roared, his voice cracking with fury. The sign came to me. 6 vultures. The god chose me. His argument was one of priority, precedence. In the ancient world, the first sign was often considered the truest. He had received the omen. His victory had been declared. What came after was irrelevant, a trick, a cosmic echo. Romulus stood firm, his calm a stark contrast to his twin's rage. You saw 6, he replied, his voice low but carrying with an unshakable authority. I saw 12. The gods did not just speak to me, brother. They shouted. His was the argument of magnitude, of quantity. What good was being first if the second sign was twice as powerful? The gods had not simply answered Remus, they had corrected him, offering a greater blessing to the one they truly favored. The crowd fractured. It was no longer one people, but two factions, huddled behind their chosen champion. The shepherds and warriors who had fought side by side their entire lives now glared at each other across an invisible line drawn in the dirt. "First is first," a supporter of Remus yelled. "The race is to the swift." "Numbers don't lie," countered one of Romulus's men. "Would you rather have 6 sheep or 12? The gods favor strength." The argument raged, a fire consuming the last of their shared history. Every principle of fairness, of law, of divine will was debated in the fading light. What mattered more? The swiftness of the omen or its substance? The claim of discovery or the weight of the evidence? It was a question with no answer, a perfect wedge designed to split two halves of a whole. In that moment, the brothers were no longer the boys who had been saved by a wolf, or the young men who had overthrown a tyrant. They were rivals, each convinced of his own divine right, each seeing the other not as a brother, but as an obstacle. The love that had bound them together through exile and battle was curdling into suspicion and resentment. Remus saw Romulus's calm not as strength, but as arrogance. He saw his brother's claim as a theft, a blatant attempt to steal the destiny that was rightfully his. He had felt the thrill of victory, and to have it snatched away was an unbearable insult. Romulus looked at Remus and saw not righteous anger, but petulance. He saw a brother blinded by the need to be first, unable to recognize a greater power when it stared him in the face. The gods had given a clear sign of superior favor, and Remus, in his pride, refused to see it. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and darkness fell upon the divided people. The augury, the sacred rite that was meant to provide clarity and unity, had achieved the exact opposite. It had given both brothers just enough evidence to believe they were right, and just enough ambiguity to ensure they would never agree. Finally, Romulus held up a hand for silence. The crowd quieted, waiting for his word. He looked past his brother, his gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of the Palatine Hill. His hill. "The gods have given me the greater sign," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. "And I will honor them. The city will be built where they have commanded, on the Palatine." He turned his back on Remus, a gesture of dismissal more powerful than any blow. He was done arguing. The time for interpretation was over. The time for action had begun. "I will mark the sacred boundary," Romulus announced to his followers. "At first light we begin. We will plow the Pomerium, the line that will separate our city from the rest of the world. The line that no one shall cross with hostile intent." He would not wait for his brother's consent. He would not wait for another sign. He would become the sign himself, an act of will to carve order out of the chaos. Remus watched, his mouth twisting into a sneer. He saw the plow, the bronze blade, the white oxen. He saw his brother, his twin, sweat beading on his brow, his face a mask of grim, almost holy concentration. And he saw the line, a pathetic scratch in the dirt, an absurd little furrow that his brother was treating like the edge of the world. He started to laugh, a low guttural sound that echoed the caws of the vultures they had seen earlier. "Is this a jest, brother?" Remus's voice dripped with scorn. "Are we children again, marking out our territory for a game of sticks and stones? A city? You call this the foundation of a city?" He gestured with a sweep of his hand at the empty fields, the scattered huts of their followers, the untamed hills. "This is dirt, Romulus. And that," he pointed at the furrow, "is a line in the dirt. Nothing more." Romulus didn't stop. He continued to guide the plow, his knuckles white, his jaw set like stone. Each turn of the earth was deliberate, a prayer and a proclamation. He wasn't just digging a trench, he was defining a space. He was separating the sacred from the profane, the inside from the outside, the us from the them. "This line," Romulus said, his voice low and tight, not looking at his brother, "is the Pomerium. It is a sacred boundary. Inside is the city, the herbs, a place of law and order, a place for homes, for temples, for men. Outside," he grunted, pushing the plow through a tough patch of roots, "is the field, the ager, a place for farming, for grazing, and for war. This line is the skin of our city. It will protect us." Remus let out another bark of laughter, this one louder, more incredulous. "Protect us? A ditch will protect us?" The wolves that raised us would laugh at such a thing. A spear protects us. A strong arm protects us. The fear we strike into the hearts of our enemies protects us. Not a furrow in the soil. He walked closer, his shadow falling over the line Romulus had just carved. He kicked a clump of dirt back into the trench, a small act of defiance. Romulus stopped the oxen and finally turned to face his twin. The look in his eyes was not one of anger, not yet. It was something colder, something more alien. It was the look of a lawgiver, a king who sees not a brother but a subject. You do not understand, Remus. This is not a wall of stone, not yet. This is a wall of faith, a wall of divine will. To cross this line unbidden, with arms and hostile intent, is to declare war not on me, but on the gods who have blessed this place. It is sacrilege. Sacrilege. The word hung in the air between them. For Remus, the only sacred things were the bonds of blood, the strength of the pack, the freedom of the hills. His brother was speaking a new language, a language of rules and rituals he had no patience for. He saw the adoring looks of Romulus's followers, the men who had seen the 12 vultures, who now saw their leader as a prophet, a man touched by the divine. And in that moment a bitter poison, long brewing in the depths of his soul, rose to the surface. Jealousy. He was Remus, the first to see the sign of the birds, the quicker of the two, the more daring. Yet here was Romulus, the second-born, the more deliberate, claiming everything. Claiming the hill, claiming the city, claiming the future. All because of a few more birds in the sky. The gods. Remus spat. The gods gave us to a wolf, brother. They left us to die on a riverbank. We are alive because of our own strength, not because of some divine plan. And I will not be ruled by your superstitions. I will not be caged by your pomerium. He took a step, placing his foot deliberately on the line. Then another, stepping over it into the space Romulus had just declared sacred. He turned, a triumphant, mocking grin spreading across his face. He was inside. He had broken the sacred law and nothing had happened. No lightning bolt from the sky. No earth swallowing him whole. There was only Romulus, his face slowly darkening like a storm cloud. See? Remus taunted, spreading his arms wide. I have crossed your magic line. What now, O King of Dirt? Will you have your god strike me down? Behind Romulus, his followers shifted uneasily. They looked from one brother to the other, the tension thick enough to taste. This was more than a sibling spat. It was a challenge to the very foundation of their new world. A moment of primal chaos erupting in the heart of a dream of order. Romulus's hand tightened on the handle of the plow. His gaze was fixed on his brother, the twin who shared his face, his blood, his memories of the she-wolf's cave and Faustulus's hearth. He saw the boy he had wrestled with, the young man he had fought beside. And he saw the mocker, the challenger, the first enemy of his city, the first man to treat its sacred laws with contempt. A terrible choice presented itself. To yield was to prove Remus right, to show that his laws were meaningless, his authority a sham. His city would die before it was even born, dissolving into a lawless camp. To act, however, to act was unthinkable. It was to sever the one bond that had defined his entire existence. He had to choose, the city or the brother, the future or the past. Remus, emboldened by his brother's hesitation, pushed the mockery further. Near the line, Romulus's men had begun to build a low, rudimentary wall, barely a foot or two high, more a symbol than a barrier. Remus looked at it, then back at Romulus, his eyes glinting with contempt. "And this is your mighty wall," he jeered. "A child could leap over such a defense. An enemy army will hardly notice it, as they trample your precious city into dust." And with that, he took a short run up and jumped. He leaped easily over the low wall, landing with a thud back inside the sacred boundary. He had done it again. He had crossed the line, violated the wall, and laughed in the face of his brother's authority. He turned, expecting to see Romulus's face contorted in frustrated anger. But that's not what he saw. The hesitation was gone. The internal conflict had vanished. Romulus's face was now a mask of cold, terrible certainty. He had made his choice. In his eyes was the chilling conviction that the law he had just created was more important than anything else in the world. More important than love. More important than blood. He dropped the plow. In his belt was the short, heavy sword he always carried. Or perhaps it was a shovel, a tool for digging, the accounts vary. The weapon itself didn't matter. The intent was all that mattered. He moved faster than Remus could react. The years of hunting, fighting, and surviving together had made them equals in combat, but Remus was caught off guard, his mind still in the realm of taunts and mockery. He did not realize he was in a fight for his life until it was too late. Romulus closed the distance in 2 long strides. He didn't shout. He didn't utter a threat. There was only the hiss of steel leaving its sheath, a flash of bronze in the Italian sun, and a sickening wet thud. Remus looked down. He saw the hilt of the weapon protruding from his chest. He saw a dark crimson stain spreading rapidly across his tunic. He looked up at his brother's face, his own expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning ultimate horror. He tried to speak, but only a bloody froth came from his lips. He stumbled backward, his legs giving way, and fell to the ground. He fell on the sacred soil he had just violated, his lifeblood soaking into the foundation of the city he would never see. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Silence descended upon the Palatine Hill, a silence broken only by the whistling wind and the final, ragged breaths of a son of Mars. Romulus stood over his brother's body, his chest heaving, the bloody weapon still in his hand. He looked down at the face of his other half, now pale and still, the one person in the world who truly knew him, who had shared his miraculous, impossible life from the very first breath. And he had killed him. He had sacrificed his own blood on the altar of his ambition. A terrible grief, a wave of cold, black despair, threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed it down. He locked it away in a dark corner of his soul where it would fester for the rest of his days. He could not be a grieving brother right now. He had to be a king. He had to finish what he started. He raised his head and looked at the stunned, terrified faces of his followers. He lifted his blade, dripping with his twin's blood, and spoke, his voice ringing with an authority that was now absolute, an authority bought at the highest possible price. So shall it be for anyone else who dares to leap over my walls. The words hung in the air, colder and harder than the stones of the new wall. This was the first law of Romulus's city, written not in ink but in blood. His brother's blood. The followers of Remus, their leader now a corpse at their feet, stood frozen. Their defiance had shattered, replaced by a chilling realization. This was not a contest between brothers anymore. This was the birth of a kingdom, and its king had just demonstrated the price of treason. There was no celebration, no triumphant roar, only a profound, heavy silence, broken by the wind whistling over the Palatine Hill. Romulus stood over his twin, the man who had shared a womb with him, who had been nursed by the same she-wolf, who had fought by his side his entire life. The historians of Rome would later debate this moment for centuries. Was it a calculated act of political necessity, or a moment of uncontrollable rage? Did Romulus feel any remorse? The legends say he did. They say that as the adrenaline faded, a deep and harrowing grief took hold. He looked at what he had done, at the still form of the only person who truly understood him, and the weight of his ambition came crashing down. He had won. He was the sole founder, the undisputed leader, but he was now utterly alone. In that moment he wasn't a king. He was just a man who had killed his brother. He commanded his followers, now a single unified group bound by fear and awe, to give Remus the burial of a king. They built a pyre, and Romulus himself, his face a mask of stone, helped carry his brother's body. He performed the rites, honoring the spirit he had just sent to the underworld. This public display of sorrow was crucial. It was a performance for his men. It showed them that this was not a murder born of simple hatred, but a tragic, necessary sacrifice for the good of the city. He was establishing a narrative. The law is greater than any man, even the king's own brother. The safety of the state, symbolized by its sacred walls, is paramount. By honoring Remus in death, Romulus was legitimizing the very act of killing him. He was turning fratricide into a founding principle. With Remus buried and the challenge to his authority silenced forever, the work began in earnest. The city, now officially named Rome after its founder, rose from the earth. Not as a city of marble and grandeur, that would come centuries later, but as a fortified settlement of wood and wattle and daub huts. It was a stronghold, a fortress, Romulus, driven by a relentless energy, organized his people. He established the first legions, created a council of elders from the most respected families, a body that would one day become the Roman Senate. He laid down laws, established customs, and created the civil and military structures that would define Rome for 1,000 years. He was a brilliant organizer, a visionary leader. But as he looked out from the Palatine Hill over his fledgling city, he saw a fatal flaw. His followers were a hard-bitten collection of shepherds, runaway servants, exiles, and men who had fled their own lands for one reason or another. They were strong, they were loyal, but they were almost all men. Rome was a barracks, a military camp. It was a city of bachelors. And a city without women is a city without children. A city without children is a city without a future. It was a generation away from extinction. Romulus knew that brute force and high walls could build a city, but they couldn't build a society. He needed families. He needed to turn his band of rough pioneers into citizens, into fathers. His first move was a stroke of genius, both pragmatic and audacious. He declared a section of the city, the area between the two groves on the Capitoline Hill, to be an asylum, a sanctuary. He sent out a proclamation to all the neighboring lands. Anyone, regardless of their past, could find refuge in Rome. And they came. The desperate, the dispossessed, the indebted. Men fleeing justice and injustice alike. Former slaves, fugitives, men who had lost everything. They flooded into Rome, swelling its population and its military strength. They owed no loyalty to any other city, any other king. Their loyalty was to Romulus, the man who had given them a second chance. Rome grew stronger, tougher, more populous. But the original problem only grew worse. The gender imbalance was now catastrophic. The city was a powder keg of restless, unmarried men. Diplomacy was the next logical step. Romulus sent embassies to the neighboring cities and tribes, most notably the powerful Sabines. His proposal was simple and reasonable. Let us join our peoples. Let your daughters marry our men. We will form alliances, share in trade, and grow prosperous together. We are a new power, a strong power. An alliance with us will benefit you greatly. The response was universal mockery and contempt. The established, aristocratic tribes looked down on the Romans. They saw a city of vagabonds and criminals, a rabble led by a man of mysterious, possibly divine, birth who had murdered his own brother. Who would want their daughters to marry such men? The Sabines and others laughed at the Roman envoys. "You've built an asylum for men," they sneered. "Perhaps you should open one for women too. That seems to be the only way you'll find wives." The rejection was a profound humiliation. It was a declaration that Rome, despite its walls and its warriors, was not considered a legitimate society. They were outcasts, pariahs. Romulus's diplomatic efforts had failed spectacularly. His people were growing restless. The taunts of their neighbors echoed in their ears. They had land, they had a king, they had strength, but they were denied the one thing that turns a settlement into a home: a family. Desperation breeds radical solutions. If his neighbors would not give him what he needed, Romulus decided he would take it. Diplomacy had failed. Deception would be his new tool. He announced that Rome would host a magnificent religious festival, the Consualia, in honor of the god Consus, a protector of the harvest. He sent invitations far and wide to the Sabines, the people of Antemne, of Crustumerium, and of Sinina. He promised spectacular horse races, grand feasts, and religious ceremonies the likes of which had never been seen in the region. Curiosity and a desire to see this upstart city for themselves overcame the neighbors' caution. Perhaps they thought the Romans were trying to make amends. Perhaps they simply couldn't resist a good festival. They came in droves, not as warriors but as families. They brought their wives and, crucially, their unmarried daughters, all dressed in their finest clothes, expecting a day of celebration. They walked through the gates of Rome, unarmed and unsuspecting, entering the city of men as honored guests. Under the sacred laws of hospitality, they were to be protected. The Romans welcomed them with open arms, with wine and with smiles. The festival began. The music played, the crowds cheered at the chariot races. Romulus himself presided over the event, dressed in a purple robe, the very picture of a gracious host. The Sabine and Latin visitors mingled, marveling at the speed with which the city had been built, at the discipline of its men. They let their guard down, lost in the spectacle and the revelry. But beneath the surface of celebration, the Roman men were coiled like springs. Every single one of them had been given their instructions. They watched the crowds, not with joy but with predatory focus. Each man had already chosen his target from among the visiting maidens. They were waiting for the signal from their king. Romulus stood before the crowd, his hand raised as if to begin the next part of the ceremony. The sun beat down. The laughter of the unsuspecting girls echoed across the field. And as Romulus let his purple cloak drop from his shoulders, the moment arrived. It was the signal. The city of bachelors was about to claim its brides. The Roman men surged forward. Chaos erupted. The festival games were forgotten, replaced by screams and the desperate scramble of feet. Fathers and brothers drew their swords, but they were outnumbered, caught completely off guard. The Romans, a disciplined pack of wolves who had waited for this moment, moved with brutal efficiency. Each man had already chosen his prize. They seized the Sabine women, hoisting them over their shoulders, ignoring their cries and their fists beating against their backs. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. The Romans weren't there to kill the Sabine men, but to steal their daughters, their future. They retreated back within the newly built walls of Rome, leaving behind a field of stunned, enraged, and humiliated men. The gates of Rome slammed shut. Inside the city, Romulus addressed the terrified women. He didn't apologize. He explained. He told them this was not an act of lust, but of necessity. He promised them they would not be slaves or concubines, but lawful wives, mothers of Roman citizens. They would share in the fortunes of the city, and their children would one day rule the world. It was a cold comfort, a promise delivered at the end of a sword, but it was a promise nonetheless. And for the men of Rome, it was a victory. They finally had what every city needs to survive: families. But outside the walls, the Sabine king, Titus Tatius, was gathering his army. This insult could not stand. This was a wound to their honor, a theft of their bloodline. War was inevitable. The Sabines marched on Rome, a force driven by vengeance. They reached the Capitoline Hill, one of Rome's 7 hills, a formidable fortress. But they found an unexpected ally. The daughter of the Roman commander of the citadel, a woman named Tarpeia, saw the golden bracelets gleaming on the arms of the Sabine soldiers. Greed consumed her. She secretly met with the Sabine king and offered to open a gate for his army. Her price? What you wear on your left arms. She meant their golden bracelets. The Sabines agreed. That night, Tarpeia crept to a side gate and unbarred the way. The Sabine soldiers poured into the fortress. As they passed her, Titus Tatius, disgusted by her treachery, held her to her bargain. He threw not only his bracelet at her, but his heavy shield as well. Every one of his soldiers followed his lead. Tarpeia was crushed to death under the weight of their gold and their contempt. Her name would live on in infamy, given to the Tarpeian Rock, the cliff on the Capitoline Hill from which Rome's most notorious traitors would be thrown to their deaths for centuries to come. With the citadel taken, the final battle was at hand. The two armies met in the valley between the Capitoline and Palatine Hills, the very space that would one day become the Roman Forum. The fighting was brutal, a desperate struggle between men who were now related by the most violent of marriages. On one side, fathers fought to reclaim their daughters. On the other, husbands fought to defend their new wives and their new city. The ground became slick with blood. The clang of sword on shield was deafening. Neither side would give way. Rome's future hung in the balance, a single battle away from being extinguished before it had ever truly begun. And then something extraordinary happened. A new sound cut through the din of battle. It was the sound of women screaming, but not in terror. It was a cry of command. The Sabine women, their hair undone, their clothes torn, ran from the city and onto the battlefield. They weren't fleeing. They were charging into the heart of the chaos, holding up their newborn babies. They placed themselves directly between the clashing swords of their fathers and their husbands. They cried out, begging them to stop. They pleaded with their Sabine fathers not to make them widows, and with their Roman husbands not to make them orphans. They screamed that this war was making them accursed. If the Romans won, they lost their fathers and brothers. If the Sabines won, they lost their husbands and children. "Turn your anger against us," they shouted. "We are the cause of this war. It is better for us to die than to live without one or the other of you." The battlefield fell silent. The soldiers, hardened warriors moments before, stood frozen. They looked at the women, their daughters, their wives. They saw the infants in their arms, their own grandchildren, born of this violence but innocent of it all. Shame and sorrow washed over them. Slowly weapons were lowered. The rage that had fueled them was extinguished by the courage of these women. In the middle of the bloody field, the generals Romulus and Titus walked forward to meet. They didn't negotiate a truce. They forged a union. The Sabines and the Romans would become one people. They would not have one king but two. Romulus and Titus would rule together as equals. Rome had not just survived its first war. It had absorbed its enemy and doubled its strength. This would become the Roman way: to conquer and incorporate, to turn enemies into citizens, to grow stronger from conflict. For a time the two kings ruled together. But the partnership was not destined to last. After a few years, Titus was killed during a riot in another town, leaving Romulus the sole, undisputed king of a now powerful, unified Rome. He would reign for nearly 40 years. He was no longer just a warlord, but a lawgiver. He established the first Senate, a council of 100 elders, the patres or fathers, whose descendants would become the patrician class. He organized the people into tribes, solidified the army structure, and laid the foundations of Roman law and religion. He took a city of outcasts, bandits, and refugees and forged them into a nation. But the wolf's blood never truly left him. He ruled as he had lived, with absolute authority and a simmering capacity for violence. As he grew older, some say he grew more autocratic, more tyrannical, ignoring the Senate he had created and ruling by his own decree. The senators, the very men he had raised to power, began to resent him. They chafed under his authority, whispering that the king had forgotten he was once just a shepherd like them. And then one day he was gone. The story of Romulus's end is as mysterious as his beginning. The official version, the one told for centuries, is a tale of divine ascension. On a day when Romulus was reviewing his troops, a sudden violent storm erupted. A whirlwind of thunder and lightning descended, and thick clouds enveloped the king. When the storm passed and the light returned, the throne was empty. Romulus was gone. The terrified soldiers were calmed when a respected nobleman stood up and declared he had seen Romulus ascending into the heavens, calling out that Rome was destined to be the capital of the world, and that he, Romulus, would now be their guardian god, Quirinus. It's a beautiful story, a fitting end for the son of a god. But there is another darker version, a rumor that persisted in the shadows of Roman history. This version says there was no storm. It claims the senators, tired of their king's tyranny, chose their moment. They surrounded him, and under the cover of their flowing togas, they murdered him. They stabbed him to death, then dismembered his body on the spot. Each senator hid a piece of the king under his robes and carried it away, leaving no trace, no body to be found. The story of the storm, they say, was a lie, a cover-up to hide the first and most terrible of Rome's many political assassinations. Did Romulus ascend to the heavens to watch over his city as a god? Or was he murdered and disposed of by the very men he had empowered? We will never know. The truth is lost to the mists of legend. But in the end it doesn't matter. What matters is the city he built. A city born from a wolf's den, founded on a brother's murder, and populated through an act of mass abduction. A city whose foundations were cemented not with mortar, but with blood and ambition. The story of Romulus and Remus is not a fairy tale. It's a brutal, honest reflection of what Rome was. A force of nature, red in tooth and claw. It was a civilization that understood from its very first day that power is not given, it is taken. That survival requires sacrifice. And that to build something that will last for eternity, you must be willing to commit acts that will echo forever. The single settlement on the Palatine Hill grew to conquer the world, and in its laws, its legions, and its unyielding ambition, the spirit of the wolf twins, the sons of Mars, the first king of Rome, lived on.